we have to believe these things are possible first before they can even become possible. It's not going to happen if you don't believe it's true. And we can't live our life based on daydreams. But at the same point, that's really where it starts. What is it that you want? How do you figure that out? And what are the ways that you can think about any potential limitations that you would come up against in getting to where you want to be? Is it difficulties with your partner? Your partner doesn't agree with this lifestyle, this job, this choice? What is it? Is it your internal fear of not being enough or not having the right education for this? What is it that you're missing? And just thinking about after you visualize, like, what are things that I can do to get myself there? What are potential problems that I can run into? And that was really what my process was like over the last few years. And I try to condense that when I work with people to just help them visualize. I do that with entrepreneurs and individual, just people who are trying to shift, not even starting their own business, but just doing something different, wanting to cultivate a different lifestyle. And I find it to be really helpful.
Integrating consciousness is a channel devised to explore a plethora of modalities accessible in supporting the collective in the exploration and expansion of self, and ultimately integrating what we've learned. The planet is shifting its vibration. Old paradigms and concepts are being challenged. Science is shifting, supporting, and merging with the teachings of ancient spiritual beliefs. The masses are feeling the shift, ultimately and collectively expanding consciousness. We are in an incredibly exciting time, yet many of us lack communities, guides, leaders, and teachers to turn to for support because we don't know how to find them. My name is Lelañea Fulton, and I'm a spiritual transcendental mindset coach and unity consciousness mentor. My intention is to create a space that supports individuals seeking personal growth by providing a wealth of knowledge, tools, strategies, insights, practitioners, and language. This will be achieved through the diverse guests I invite to this podcast. So your free and easy support of subscribing, rating, and reviewing this podcast is paramount, as is how such information can move through the platform algorithms. Every month, we will offer free and easy ways that you can acquire free coaching sessions and more with your favorite practitioner. I would also like to invite you to please share any episode that moves you. You never know when a small act of kindness can support a huge energetic shift in a person's life. We are all here to support one another through acts of kindness, and to pass along information is a tremendous act of service. So thank you, and may you recognize the powerful creator you are.
Hello, beautiful beings, and welcome to another episode of Integrating Consciousness. Today, I am spending some time with a long-term friend, Jennifer Estevez, who is an entrepreneur who has made headway in the masculine of the 3D world and has left it all behind to transition into a more harmonious space, leaning and learning into a creative space of femininity and spirituality. Welcome, Jennifer. It's such a pleasure to see your beautiful face.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So I have a question for you, which I think will come up for quite a few viewers, but what does it mean to work in a masculine system in the 3D?
Wow, there's a lot of ways that I could respond to that. I feel that the first thing that comes to mind for me is working in a masculine system is working in a system where rest is not prioritized, where action and constantly being in motion and doing is prioritized. Whereas working in a more feminine system, I feel that rhythms of work and rest and play are much more respected and honored.
Mm. And just to give a little context to the viewer, can you tell a little bit about your entrepreneurship, your former company, and the dissolving of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had been originally working in food, beverage, and hospitality, which is how I met Lelañea. And I was working originally as a sommelier in fine dining restaurants. And then I transitioned over to working as a consultant, which led me to marketing and communications. And that led me to also consulting on startups. And so it's been a path kind of revolving between all those different areas. And over the last few years, I've stepped more into working with plant-based sustainable companies versus working with wine industry companies So that's been a little bit more nourishing, at least as the attitudes between the spaces are pretty different. And yeah, moving from the wine industry, moving away from it rather, really began for me in 2020 when I just realized that it wasn't aligned for me to work in the alcohol industry. There was so many different personalities there, and personalities doesn't always mean a great thing. There's a lot of toxicity in that industry. And as much as I also had a really good starting place from working in that industry, I developed a lot of beautiful relationships. There were many that were equally as toxic. And just working in industries that don't revolve fully around being intoxicated and revolve more around awareness has been a path for me over the last few years. And closing down now my marketing company, I'm in the process of that, has just really shown me again what I'm walking away from. And I feel like I'm fully closing that chapter, which actually, as challenging as it has been and as challenging as it continues to be as we're in the final steps of that, it feels really relieving and exciting to continue into the next chapter moving away from that.
So I thought it'd be a great episode to interview you because there's so many people in the world who are saying, how do I get out of this job? How do I get out of the toxicity of this job? How do I transition into something that feels more harmonious, more balanced, that recognizes me as a human and isn't treating me like AI, where it's constantly about extraction and slave labor? And so
Mhm.
many people are feeling called to make a transition and move away from the toxic systems that our generation, I feel like, is the cusp that is really in the awakening and seeing younger generations that are moving away from it. And we've got one foot in it and one foot out. And
Mhm.
and I thought this episode would be really great to support people and show them that you can move out of it. You can create your own business. You can work for yourself. You can find a sustainable company that respects you as a human being and doesn't see you as just some sort of entity to extract from. And I love that you moved from the hospitality industry, specifically the alcohol, the wine side, which is an incredibly toxic system that is chock full of disassociation and the abuse of a substance that does not support our bodies, does not support our minds. And you were able to move away from that and into a line of work, into a world that is 180-degree difference. Not to say that there's not some levels of toxicity in the spiritual domain, but there is almost 180-degree difference. Can you talk about that difference a little bit?
Absolutely. I feel it's been interesting working across all the different verticals. I've worked across wine, I've worked across cannabis, psychedelics, spirituality, and just been in some interesting cross sections of all these industries. I feel like the wine industry people, my experience is people tend to be a lot more angry, and there's a lot of projection in that industry, and people just don't really own their experiences. It's very challenging to be with. And again, a lot of times, like you were saying, lots of toxicity. There's just how many times I worked in the industry and had chefs yell at me or people behave inappropriately after drinking. I can't even count. It would just be pointless for me to try to count that. I feel like working with those clients is just incredibly draining, and there's just a lot of ego, like huge egos there. People feeling like what they're doing is really important, and a lot of times just it's great. I love beautiful artisan wine. I still am a huge supporter of that, but it's just really an industry where that is at the forefront. There's just ego and money and power. Whereas working with the cannabis industry, I feel that the cannabis industry is interestingly flaky, and I feel like everybody there has anxiety. I've noticed that a lot working with those types of clients. Those are the clients that will ask you for a bunch of things and not call you back for 3 months. And you're in the middle of a project, just disappear. With psychedelics people, I feel that they're very peaceful in general, and people have a lot more of a spiritual tie-in when you're working with the psychedelics folks, but also tends to be a little more whimsical, forgetting call times and forgetting project due dates and things like that, but probably the least toxic out of all of them. Whereas the spiritual people that I've worked with, I feel the spiritual folks, it's a mixed bag because they could be involved in all of those different industries. And I feel like in the spiritual industries, a lot of times I experience and have worked with a lot of hypocrisy. and just experience, for example, people who support great teachers that I work with just being very challenging to work with and not really supporting people and coming to the teacher in a way that like creates community. It's just very confusing and just seems like the exactly what is not needed to build community in terms of spirituality. Yeah, it's been really great though when I reflect on it, stepping away from wine and all of that anger and other intoxicants. I view cannabis as an intoxicant. I don't personally feel like it's helpful. If I have a strained muscle or something, I'll take some cannabis. I don't personally prefer to use it for anything else besides like literally managing physical pain. I feel like those two things, just working away from things that, cloud our senses is really what I would like to do. Again, in the spiritual community, there's always issues. And in the psychedelics like community, there's always issues. But the general tone of those industries and why I love working in those and why I love working in the areas that I'm working in now at interpersonal work as well is that everybody's working on themselves as a general rule. And so people are more open to feedback. People are more open to have conversations. If there's a problem, people will more likely approach you clearly with a problem instead of just projecting on you when there's an issue. And so it takes a lot of guesswork out of things and, in my opinion, saves a lot of energy and just feels so much better for my nervous system. It's really great.
Yeah, I remember that you made this transition as you started doing work on your nervous system and regulating your nervous system and becoming a bit more in control of it rather than making decisions from a dysregulated space.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that's when you started making this transition into this new space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I feel like in 2020, I just realized I needed a change from working in this industry. I realized that it was no longer aligned with my internal processes. And I made the conscious decision to go and sit for an ayahuasca journey. And I began that transition. That was part of my query for ayahuasca and for myself when I went to go sit in that space for the first time was, what do I need to be doing? I'm not happy. What is it in my life that needs to shift? And the response that I got was, you need to work with plant medicine and plant based food. This is my very first ayahuasca ceremony. I felt like I received very clear advice on that. And I took a while to wrap my head around what that meant. And then I really just made the conscious decision to shifting to working with plant based startups and to working in the plant medicine space, learning more about these beautiful medicines. And again, that's a huge 180 from working in the wine industry, working as a sommelier, working on the floor, being in service. In some ways it is, but also in some ways it's not. It's actually really interesting because when you help out in ceremony, which I began doing very quickly, I have had so many times when I've been in ceremony, when I've been helping out, usually in ayahuasca and some Pedro ceremonies, where I feel like I'm having a server nightmare again. I'm like, oh, this person needs this person needs this person has to go to the bathroom, this person needs their puke bucket cleaned. It's still just another version of the same thing of being of service, but the energy of it is very different and it feels really great. And I know you asked me earlier about how to transition and mentioned that you wanted to speak about that a little bit. And I really had to think about that a lot myself after that first ayahuasca journey. And I felt it took me a minute to really allow myself to believe, first of all, that I could do that. I listened to a really great podcast not that long ago on upper limits, right? So, speaking of my nervous system, upper limits are that glass ceiling that we hit when our nervous system doesn't believe that we can do more. They don't believe that we can have that part that's amazing. Like it feels triggering almost because it's too good to be true, right? Waiting for the other shoe to drop is what we're doing. And in reality, that's just our nervous system telling us that we've hit a limit and we're going past what we've experienced and what we've been able to experience in the past in terms of just what we've been able to hold. And I felt like I was experiencing that at that time. And it did feel a little bit triggering. Oh, like I can do something that is better for me than this. I can do something that feels better for me emotionally and spiritually. And I've just been conditioned to think that I can't. And so sitting with myself and really undoing all of that conditioning and being okay to make maybe a little bit less money while I figured it out, minimizing my expenses so I could put my values first over just getting stuck in this consumer cycle was really how I began it. And that is really what it looks like, I think, for everybody. I do this exercise with clients where I ask them to think about what is it that they would do if they had no limits? No limits at all. No money limits, like no limits in terms of their education, their perceived limits in terms of their intellect or capabilities. What is it that they would love to be doing And how do they get there? Like, how could they imagine it step by step? And when they get there, how can they imagine it in its fullness? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What are you hearing when you're in this like space where you have succeeded? What is that for you? And it's a really fun exercise.
Yeah, I love that you're playing around with creative visualizations because it's that creativity and playfulness of fantasy that really allows us to recognize how certain concepts or thoughts or ideas feel somatically within our body. And it's the initial stage of recognizing fantasy and daydreaming is about recognizing what our higher self is wanting. Where do we want to go? What is the direction? What are the things it is that we want to do? What are the emotions that we're wanting to feel? And it's
Yeah.
that allowing ourselves the space, the pause to just fantasize and daydream that really helps redirect us and letting us know where it is that the direction that we need to be going in.
Absolutely. We have to believe these things are possible first before they can even become possible. It's not going to happen if you don't believe it's true. And we can't live our life based on daydreams. But at the same point, that's really where it starts. What is it that you want? How do you figure that out? And what are the ways that you can think about any potential limitations that you would come up against in getting to where you want to be? Is it difficulties with your partner? Your partner doesn't agree with this lifestyle, this job, this choice? What is it? Is it your internal fear of not being enough or not having the right education for this? What is it that you're missing? And just thinking about after you visualize, like, what are things that I can do to get myself there? What are potential problems that I can run into? And that was really what my process was like over the last few years. And I try to condense that when I work with people to just help them visualize. I do that with entrepreneurs and individual, just people who are trying to shift, not even starting their own business, but just doing something different, wanting to cultivate a different lifestyle. And I find it to be really helpful.
Just a gentle reminder that if you're doing the inner work or feeling called for deeper self exploration and transformation, that my practice is here to support you. My role as a transcendental mindset coach is to serve as a compassionate guide and mirror, reflecting your inner brilliance and potential because you came to this life with everything it is that you need to align with your path and purpose. In doing this, I offer a range of services tailored to meet the unique needs of each client, incorporating the support of evidence-based coaching techniques, meditation, mindfulness practices, gene keys shadow work, pattern recognition, somatic work, inner parts work, kinetic and breath work to facilitate inner balance and alignment alongside being trauma informed. We will work in tandem as I support you in integrating or embodying your newfound awareness and heightened openness to a higher form of consciousness. It is my intention to support you as you architecturally design the reality you want to participate in and the life that you want to live. My practice supports you in being a masterful creator of intentions. You can contact me via my website. The link is in the show notes. So thank you, and please enjoy the remainder of the episode.
So I recognize that in your transition, you basically did a pivot. You did an analysis of your value system and recognized that the wine industry and even the cannabis industry was no longer in alignment, that you still wanted to be of service, just not service to people who were looking to consume wine. Having a marketing company, you were able to strategically pivot and turn your gaze towards an industry that felt more fulfilling, that was more
Mhm.
supportive of your nervous system, but still allowed you to lean into your craft and your art and what you had been doing for quite some time. So it looks like to me, it's a really beautiful way of recognizing how can I just transition what it is that I know, what it is that I've been doing and I know how to do. How can I transition it into other areas of interest?
Yeah, absolutely. Taking the tools that you have right now and the skill sets that you have, I work through conscious leadership groups methods as well, where they encourage you to work in your areas of genius, right? So you think about what you're doing that's not in your areas of genius and try to eliminate all the other things. There's areas of genius, areas of excellence, areas of competence, areas of incompetence. And areas of genius is where you are doing the thing that you do best and that you do with the most joy. And so by taking away as much of the stuff as you can off of the other areas, excellence, competence, incompetence, that's how you're going to thrive. And I just realized that I was no longer able to be in my zone of genius in the wine industry because I didn't find joy in it anymore. And so that was a really big thing that shifted for me. And I notice when I work in the space and one-on-one work with people or with psychedelics, I find it to be just fully nourishing. I feel fully engaged and it just feels very natural for me there. And so that just has involved me cutting out more of the things. So I have more space for that over the years and just realizing where my mind was. I didn't want to work with people who are numbing anymore. And that's how I view like cannabis and alcohol. I want to work with people who are on a path of looking inward. And I want my friendships to be like that too. And in my friendships, that was more persistent. So why was I allowing that in my work life? That was something I had to sit with. Yeah, it was important for me to consider that.
And for those who are interested in what their zone of genius or where they think they should be focusing their attention in terms of innate gifts to express into the world, I believe it's Ikigai, which is a really fun, I don't want to say program, I'm not quite sure what it's called, but it's these kind of questions and it allows you to explore and through a set of questions will prompt out the area that is maybe your area of genius.
Hmm.
And aside from Ikigai, there's also the Gene Keys, which is a really beautiful voice in assisting you to find your inner voice and really locate what it is within yourself that gets excited about life and hobbies and interests and culture in different areas. And so you can explore your brand, you can explore your purpose. There's a hologenetic profile. And if you go to Gene Keys, you can get your hologenetic profile for free. They have guides. And in my coaching technique, I use Gene Keys with a lot of my clients in terms of shadow work. So it's a really beautiful form of doing shadow work for anyone that's really interested in learning more about themselves in terms of career purpose and drive.
Definitely. I love the Gene Keys as well. I think it's super helpful. I've
Mhm.
also been working with the Enneagram system lately
Mhm.
and really been enjoying that. So it's been
Yeah.
good for self discovery.
Enneagram feels like it's really allowing you to learn about your personality, how you're showing up in human form. And then for me, Gene Keys is really about learning more about your soul's purpose, why you're here, what your brand and your voice is. If you can play with both realms, I feel like you have a pretty balanced perspective. And you can ultimately you decide if this is true, does this resonate or not? No one can tell you who you are.
Totally. I agree with that.
So, something that you said a little earlier brought up something for me. So, you said that while in San Pedro or ayahuasca ceremony as a facilitator, helping people who are in ceremony and supporting and guiding and leading them, that for you, it feels like almost like being back in hospitality, being on the floor in service. And
Mhm.
I was doing some of my own shadow work and really trying to hone in on seeing the patterns and the transitions because I too was a sommelier for many years in New York City, Michelin restaurants, trendy, fun hospitality programs. And for anyone who's not familiar with the work of a sommelier or wine director, it's hyper competitive and even more competitive once that documentary Somm came out. And then next thing you knew, everybody wanted to be a Somm, and it just became definitely uh, inflated. And it was a breeding ground for a lot of sexual abuse and a lot of aggression, manipulation, but aside from the deep shadow aspects of that industry, I really wanted to extract how that industry allowed me to be who I am today and to hone in on the gifts that I exhibit today in my transcendental coaching.
Right.
And I recognized when I really looked into what it was that I enjoyed and loved most about being a sommelier, and it was spending time with the people who would come in who didn't know anything about wine, didn't know their palate, didn't know what they were interested in, didn't know grape varietals. And the last place I ran, I had a team of 5. And it was up to me. I only touched tables, usually of the investors or celebs or whoever who came in. But it
Mm.
was my favorite, and I would always make a beeline right for the customers who did not know their palettes. And I found that it was the most fun for me. It was to be of service to these individuals, to support them and learning about their experience, like internalizing, like what's happening inside of you right now? What does this feel like? And they didn't have a language to really understand the experience that they were feeling through their interpretation of this beverage that was moving through their lips and tingling their gums and just exciting their mouths. And they didn't know how to articulate it. And I would spend a significant amount of time walking these people through their experiences and like really supporting them coming in touch with what that meant. And then trying to give them a language by I would use color. I would ask them to describe their favorite color and to what does that color feel like? And that's how I would pair wine because we would use different language. And I just that's like my favorite part of all of that work. And what's remarkable is it's transitioned into what I do today. Really sitting
Uh-huh.
people with working through patterns and emotions and shadow work and just recognizing what's happening, bringing awareness, self awareness. So I'm wondering, like, for that industry, what was it that you learned in that industry that allowed you to transition into who you are today and really support you in the direction that you've gone in?
Thank you for that story. I love that. I feel that the industry really spoke to me in the first place because I loved working with people. I grew up in a family of scientists and doctors who wanted me to go and work on projects with them during my summer vacation. And I was great at it. I have published papers in Science magazine with my family, and I did that in my teens. And it was on dementia, depression, migraine. And I just realized I didn't want to spend my whole life looking through a microscope. That wasn't me. That wasn't who I am. I love being social. I love learning about people. And I feel like people are the lens that I really learn about the world through, especially when I was younger and I didn't have as much of a budget to travel. I had some really fun jobs and interesting opportunities where, for example, I worked in one of the most expensive condo buildings in all of San Francisco. And I was like the building therapist and bartender at the same time. It was just like I also had a great list of wines that I worked with and got to sell them really nice wine and just learn about people through their preferences, understand them through these small details. And it's funny because I still have some people from that period of time in my life that I'm great friends with that have been also incredible, instrumental people who have changed my life. And all of that is through the power of connection. So for me, that's what I view as one of the most important things. And again, you have this urgency in the service industry, this attentiveness to people, this attentiveness to watching what's going on in somebody's face, their posture, all these small cues you're always watching. It's, oh, this guy did that dish. I can look at his face and he's just not really into it. And then he's not going to say anything because he's very polite, but how can I make his experience better by offering something else before he even has to ask? He didn't like this cocktail, but he's too nice to say it. Let me just give him something else, whatever it is. And it creates this intuitive sense of being when you work in that industry that absolutely translates to coaching. It translates to entrepreneurship. There's so much innovation and so much just like improvisation is probably the better word for it that has to happen when you're in the restaurant industry is, oh, we have an event and somebody knocked a table over. All right, I guess we're going to clean it all up and we're going to start again. And it's pretty funny just how calm you get in that, how used to that you get. That directly translates to the psychedelic space where you're holding space for people as they're having different kinds of emotional processes. Again, more intentionally, usually they're trying to be there to heal, to work through an emotional process, to do self work. Whereas sometimes when people are drunk, they just come out. But yeah, it taught me just to read people, to observe, to watch what people need. And that applies to psychedelics, that applies to coaching, entrepreneurship. And when you think about entrepreneurship, my marketing company, it's really funny. We use a lot of restaurant analogies. We're in the weeds right now. That just means that we're behind the ball on taking care of the tables. We still use restaurant analogies because a lot of my team are from the restaurant industry and it feels very applicable. Like we'll just say, hey, this person didn't hand this client off. The table handoff was not good. Like when servers change shifts, there's just a lot of relevant parallels because even in entrepreneurship and in the startup world, you're figuring it out. You're figuring out the creation of something that doesn't exist. And so you just have to be comfortable with not knowing what's happening and making a roadmap to some unknown destination to create this end goal. That's it. It feels, again, just very reminiscent of the restaurant world. We're just starting service. We don't know where we're going to end, but we're going to figure it out.
And
And
there's
I
a
feel
lot of
like,
intuition too, like leaning
yeah,
into your intuition.
yeah, absolutely. It's all about intuition. It's all about timing. I still joke with people when I'm like working in psychedelic spaces. I have like my appetizer timers in my head. If something like comes out and in a restaurant, you have a 10 minutes like appetizer timer. This is what it's supposed to be. Like it's got to be out on the table in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever it is. And I just have these like set sequences of timing things in my head when I'm working with people, whether that's in person live in the psychedelic space or coaching or even with startups. I'm like,
Mm.
okay, this is the timing of this. I can tell that this is when this needs to happen. And it has really nurtured my intuition with people deeply. So I'm very grateful for that background. It's been very helpful.
Yeah, when I was building my teams in New York, the first thing that I would really when interviewing a sommelier to be on the team was really focused on their awareness and
Right.
self-awareness and awareness of others. And with the juniors that would be on the team, it was something that I would repeat very often is the most important aspect of being a sommelier is psychology. It's about psychology 101. You can memorize all of the ludis of a particular vineyard, but if you can't read a guest, then it's all irrelevant. Really should go in academia. But being here is really about psychology. And being on the floor of a restaurant, especially one that's like where there's a lot of in New York, there's a lot of ego because it's very expensive. And you've got all of your Black Amex guests and they want it to be known. And it becomes a competition of who's got the best Bordeaux on the table or Burgundy on the table. And it's a lot about being seen. And it really was an area that I learned about energy, and it was really a place where I started honing in on watching how energy would move in a room and how one guest who became disgruntled because maybe their ego felt bruised or something had happened where expectations had not been met. And that energy would start to move because it'd be projected onto a server or manager or even another sommelier. And as that energy moves and how it trickles down the line of defense of those who are trying to ultimately calm this person and then how it affects the neighboring guests at the table. And you can just see the energy move through the room and just illuminate each individual and how that individual transmutes that energy. Do they absorb it and they transmute it, or do they take it and add to it and then project it onto another person? And then the next thing, this energy has made its way into a kitchen. And depending on where you're at, it's a very silent, very controlled atmosphere, but yet the energy has still made its way in and started as affecting people there, or vice versa. It starts in the kitchen with a very angry chef, and that
Mhm.
energy has made its way into a dining room. Absolutely incredible for people watching and to really observe how energy moves and affects and how certain people can transmute and some people are just really reactive to it.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Chef's having a bad night. We're probably all having a bad night. It just trickles out. It trickles out so
Yeah.
quickly. And it's interesting being the leader of a company. That was one of the things that I had to also start thinking about in the pandemic because I'm just like, if I'm not together, how am I going to ask all the people on my team to be together? I need to work on my inner peace first. And that was hard for me because sometimes when we are in service, we don't think of being in service to ourselves, but that
Mhm.
actually came up for me as something that was really lacking, like self-service and compassion for self as well. And that was something really big that I needed to shift because it does ripple out. Everything that we do really starts with us. Every change that we make starts with us. We
Mhm.
can't expect to see it in the
Mhm.
world. We're just not going to be open to it if we're not doing that for
Yeah.
ourselves first.
Yeah. Yeah. Because our internal reality is our external reality, and we're subjecting people to what's happening internally within us. And a true act of kindness is to manage what's happening here before you project it onto somebody else, or just even unintentionally force it onto somebody else because you're not truly inviting somebody into that. So if there's chaos happening in here, it's really up to each and every one of us to be responsible for our energy and the realities that we're creating and that we're putting out there into the world.
I agree.
When we started the conversation off, we were talking about the concept of masculine structures, the masculinity of this very 3D type of career field. And another element, we mentioned toxicity. And what I would like to mention is, and go into and get your feelings on, is how masculine the industry really was. On the pendulum swing of masculinity, it leaned into toxic masculinity as it was very male dominated with a lot of shadows, a lot of ego. And then on top of that, you have the numbing mechanisms of alcohol, right? And the influences of alcohol. And
Mhm.
I know that you were very much somehow embedded or a part of the whole fiasco of the, what is it, the Master Som Guild fiasco of how sommeliers who were ousted during the Me Too movement for sexual assault and just really taking advantage of female coworkers.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think that I was in the restaurant industry definitely during that time, and I had interactions with some of the people that got called out. I never was called to speak up specifically, and so I didn't go out of my way to do, but I would also speak up when people would ask me about it in more personal ways. But yeah, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of the master sommeliers that would essentially just solicit women for sexual favors or for their company in ways that were questionable at best, questionable at least, and really inappropriate at best. And yeah, they would do that just in exchange for just support in studying or support in going on wine trips and things like that. That's one example. But then being in just the industry in general, the way that people would show up, there was a lot of acceptance around temper. There was a lot of acceptance. Like it was very normalized to just be angry, to use anger as a method of solving problems, to minimize people and to what other yeah, like humiliate. There's so many different ways that showed up. It was just like demeaning people was a way of controlling people. And there was a predominance of masculine folks in spaces of power. Like women were actively kept out of like predominant roles in the wine industry. There was probably 1 to 5 ratio of men in wine buyer positions versus women. And as I left the industry in San Francisco, we were definitely seeing a shift in that. And it was really wonderful to see, but still a lot of the people, for example, who were in wine sales or who were in distribution, it would be a very similar dynamic where they would just use their power for something like, oh, do you want this? Let me take you out to dinner. Or, oh, there's a caveat. Oh, wait for it. And it was awful. And it was something that I had to find my ways of managing and dealing with peacefully, even though it was incredibly uncomfortable. And I sacrificed my peace to do that. And that was really part of my promise to myself is I wasn't gonna do that anymore, and I realized how much I was letting my own boundaries be crossed for other people's comfortability, and especially with men in that space. And I've lost some friends over it that I had from the wine industry that were really great friends for a long time, or so I considered, with less strong boundaries in place, and I am okay with that. I realized that there were plenty of people that don't treat other people with value in that industry and think that they are the best in some way or they know best. And yeah, part of moving on is really just reasserting those boundaries in myself of what safety looks like. Safety doesn't look like having somebody who has to yell at me to resolve an argument, and also not being a part of things like that, changing how I view people and how I value people, because those are the values that were really championed there. What can somebody do for you? And there was a lot of that coming from the people who were in places of power who were men.
I haven't been in it since 2016, so I'm very curious if it has changed in some way, like if it's started to alter and create some sort of harmonious balance, if the rise of women has created some sort of balance. Because I can even say that as a woman in that industry, that I was also supporting the belief systems and the toxic masculinity, because that's how I was groomed in the industry. And I
Right?
believed that in order to get up, I had to play by the same rules. And I remember being in a lead position and having a team and guiding the team and being a team leader and having these people who are younger and older and some more seasoned than me who are looking at me to make decisions and looking at how I'm going to respond and looking if I'm going to project expectations and lead with an iron fist, as everyone was doing at that time. And I remember having this switch in me that was very much I don't want to live like this and I don't want to be like this. And just
Mhm.
because this is what has come down upon me doesn't mean that I want to perpetuate this. And at that
Mhm.
time, I had a superior who was above me, and he was absolutely exquisite human being. And he was
Mhm.
the general manager of the entire operation and promoted love and curiosity and questioning and was a young father, very devoted husband. And so he
Mhm.
led by his morals and his integrity. And it was having him as a buffer between the owners and the investors who were operating at this very shadow level. Having him as a buffer between myself and them, that was a source of protection that would allow me at that time to start leaning more into my femininity and my creativity because I was being given license to do that. And then also operating more from a heart space, which is a hard thing to do back in that time, in that era in New York City, where you're very closed and you're in a protective mode to some degree. And being vulnerable isn't something that you want to be in New York at a younger age. And I just remember him giving me that space that really allowed for this complete mindset shift.
Yeah,
So I'm
that's
very
beautiful.
curious. Yeah, I'm just really curious. I don't know anyone who's still in that industry, and I'm just wondering if they're still dealing with the same trials and tribulations before, or if there's a real noticeable difference in the culture.
I think yeses and nos. I'm in the process of ending my marketing company, which is where we still deal with. I say deal with, you can already tell I'm going to say something less than positive. We still work with clients that are not that much different. And we've had some clients for a really long time. Some clients that we have had for a long time are incredible. They're some of the top names in the industry, very passionate about their craft. And I don't have anything other than that to say about them. They're just wonderful. But they are the absolute minority. Those are my experiences. And when we worked with restaurants, we worked in like consultation roles with different hospitality programs and things of that nature. A lot of times there is something tricky and emotional that you have to deal with people there. There's still a lot of ego. I've found it to be slightly different in that I feel that women and minorities are more included and there's like an active awareness that needs to be a part of the culture. It still feels like there's work to be done. It really does. Yeah.
So I'm curious in the new environment and culture that you find yourself in, working in the plant medicine space. We know that it doesn't matter what space you're working in, whether it's in the space of clergy and religion, to Buddhism, to hospitality, to spirituality. There's
Mhm.
always the shadow of victimhood, which means there's always the shadow of those who are taking advantage of those who are in victimhood, right? It's this beautiful dynamic that exists.
First.
And I'm curious if you've had that experience yet in this new culture and space.
I wish I could say that I hadn't, but I definitely have. And there's a lot of dark, sticky stuff in this space too, because it's the same kind of thing. The wine industry also has these problems. And when I sit with the industry that has become shamanism, it is an industry, unfortunately. And there are people who don't just view it as doing healing work and they view it as something that they're doing for money or for power or for sex. Those are very dangerous things in that space, especially because people are there for healing work and they're extra vulnerable. They're there to resolve like mental, physical wellness issues. They're there to work on their deepest, darkest stuff. And so that creates a lot of space for predators and for people who just have their shadows not in check to operate very easily. So my personal experiences with it have been primarily, thankfully, around the money aspect, the monetary aspect, people treating this like a business rather than worrying about the safe limitations of what they can actually hold in a ceremony. Having too many people there, not having proper safety in place, not having guardians and assistants trained appropriately before they're in the space. That's really been my experience. And then also on the other side of that too, like when people are creating communities and cultures that are supposed to be inclusive, not actually being inclusive and being controlling or being just unclear about what standards are. And again, it's interesting because some of those people I can tell they're coming from very good spaces and wanting to do the right thing, but also I can see them stepping into victimhood. And I do think that, again, the sexuality aspect, that is something that does occur. And I haven't been in a group or in a community where there has been outright rape, but there has been inappropriate sexual power dynamics with facilitators that I've experienced and had to speak out about. And yeah, it's definitely still a masculine dominated space here as well. And it's even more interesting because it's an under the board, like just behind the curtain industry right now. Like we're not fully like legal. It's like a gray space, right? Even have a church, it's a gray space. They say that you're defensible, but you're not legal. It creates a lot of room for those instabilities to flourish because there's no set standards. There's no way to hold people accountable in that industry without being like, "Hey, I did ayahuasca last weekend, and this person was inappropriate with me." There's no way to do that. So that's been my experience.
Yeah, accountability is much, much more difficult to ask someone to absorb, is taking
Hmm.
responsibility and accountability for certain behaviors. If there's a viewer who is feeling called to enter into a plant medicine space, whether as a consumer or to eventually move into a facilitating position, is there any advice that you would give them or anything that you would like to say to them to help them prepare themselves for navigating such a gray space?
Yeah, absolutely. With having somebody who's new to the space, I recommend that everybody does their research. Phone a friend. Make sure that you are checking as much as you can the information about the person that you're going to go sit with. It's hard because sometimes there's not a lot. Sometimes people don't have websites because you can't just say I serve ayahuasca on a website. It's something that's important to get references from friends and to really check. I have a lot of people that call me because I've lived back and forth between Peru and LA to get references to go to the jungle and still decide to go and go without references to go sit with people. And I don't recommend doing that. There's a lot of things that can happen, and you don't know the history of that person. You don't know the history of their facilitators. You don't want to be in a compromised space where you're in a compromised mental state, reality, and have somebody who's untrustworthy in the room because your brain has so much neuroplasticity. You just are impacted even more intensely by the things that happen in that space. So research is of the utmost importance. References are of the utmost importance. Know what they're putting into their brew. Make sure that once you're connecting with the facilitator, even if you've had references, ask what's in the brew, ask what it is you're drinking. Make sure that you have somebody who gives you transparency. I know there's some facilitators who don't give, so you're not going to give your recipe to somebody, but they have to at least be disclosing what they're putting in there for health purposes and make sure that if your facilitator isn't curious and asking you questions about your physical and mental health ahead of that, then you have a problem because they're taking risks that are really unnecessary. Because on a physical level, you can really hurt people with them, if they aren't prepared for the space properly, if they're on like SSRIs or if they're on blood pressure medication. There's just things that could really hurt them. And if you're not asking those critical questions, you won't know. Or if they have a history of psychosis, this could actually not be a thing for them to need. There's some people out there who just could benefit from psychedelics potentially, but also could be harmed by it. So it's something to make sure that you're really careful and asking about that. And I feel the other question you asked is really important to cover. So many people, after they sit for ayahuasca their first time or come out of it and they're like, oh, ayahuasca told me I'm a shaman. Okay. I have heard that more times than I can count. And I really had to sit with myself when I started feeling that pull for myself to work with these medicines. I was like, am I just like full of it? Is this my ego? Am I just what am I getting out of this? Like, why am I wanting to do this? And I really thought about it hard. What are my reasons coming from my shadow? What are my reasons coming from my light? How are they intertwined? What are the darker reasons that I want to do this? And I think it's important for people to sit with themselves and really ask those questions and ask another facilitator to talk that through with them. We need to be open with each other. And this is something that I've done. When I went to Peru, I learned how to brew Wachuma and I began serving Wachuma. I started very humbly first with myself and just seeing how I could handle myself in all of these different situations. Because if you can't handle yourself on that medicine, you shouldn't be serving other people that medicine, in my opinion. Like everybody has processes that they go through as a facilitator. Usually you have to drink a little bit. You need to be able to manage yourself in that situation. So that's the first thing you need to think about. Are you in a place in your process where that's safe for you to actually lead other people? Or can you just contribute your healing gifts in somebody else's space or in some other way that doesn't involve this? Because again, this is a slippery slope. And then when you're talking to somebody who you consider like a teacher or a mentor, have that clear conversation with them about why you want to serve. What is it that's happening for you that makes you inspired to do this? We had facilitation groups where we had groups of facilitators sit together and we had a discussion about that. And it was something that was very eye opening for me to actually make myself say what it is and to hear everybody else's. For some people to say, speaking as my higher self, I like to do this because I like being of service. And then speaking as my shadow self, I like to do this because I like to be perceived as wise and I like to be the person in charge. Owning whatever that is that comes up and really sitting with yourself and contemplating that is really important, because if you're not looking at those things and you become a facilitator, those things are going to sneak up on you. If you're not aware of those things and you're like, oh, those things aren't me, that's just not real. Those things are going to sneak up on you. And you have to be in full awareness of your shadows as much as you are of your light. And so that's what I say to people. There's also so many other ways to be of service than to be a facilitator. It's a really tricky path. It actually is sometimes not that lucrative. It's something you can make money off of, but I find aversion for myself in a lot of ways in making money off of people's healing. And so I find it to be something that it's a very fine line to walk. How do you want to do it? There's different people that do it different ways. And I think it's literally just a easy thing to do to become out of integrity with yourself. And it's a tightrope to walk. So just think about it carefully if you're thinking about doing that, and don't take it lightly. We don't need that many more facilitators in the world, but we do need people who are thinking about what they're doing and trying to facilitate really taking it seriously.
Yeah, I can piggyback on that. I literally just had an email the other day of someone that I introduced to a particular facilitator and ceremony, and he went to and this person has some deep psychological issues to work through, some really really powerful shadows, and is feeling called but not to develop self-awareness, has been spiritually bypassing and has been
Right.
bypassing for a very long time and has been using psychedelics in other forms, but is now using ayahuasca after this experience, and sent
Mm.
me an email saying that he feels called to be a coach, and he was coaching everyone during the ceremony. And by the end, everyone thought he was a coach. And this is a person who's literally running from his shadow and is
Mm.
using it to disassociate and is really unhealthy and hurtful and harmful to the people around him. And and it's bewildering to me. And it's a great reminder that plant medicine is not going to heal you. Plant medicine is not like, the work still needs to be done. It's internal.
Mhm.
It brings light, it sheds light on the shadows, and it's to some degree a little bit faster to see the shadows that are happening because it's bringing it to you very quickly and even in visualizations. But it is not what's going to heal you. It's not going to change you. It's not going to make your life wonderful after a couple ceremonies or a couple doses. It is asking you to hold space for yourself and to do the work. And you do have coaches and therapists and social workers. You have some really beautiful healers out there in the world who want to support you, who do have a foot in the plant medicine and spiritual domain, who can hold space in a much different way than we've seen these particular professions hold space in the past. And I can say, I hear so often so many people who are not doing the inner work for themselves who feel inspired to become a coach. And if we can't do the healing for ourselves, if we can't create a blueprint for ourselves, then and recognize our own shadows and really sit with them, how the hell are you going to have the capacity and the wherewithal to do that for another human being?
You just don't. And that's how I feel about it very
Yeah.
strongly. So if you're asking my opinion, that's what I say about it. I think that what I love about this profession, though, doing this as a profession, as let's say a third of my time is spent doing this, it invites me to also take the same amount of time to care
Mhm,
for myself.
mhm,
Because, and sometimes I don't always do a good job at that. But when I go into that space and I haven't done a good job of taking care of myself, I
mhm,
am always reminded by those plants. And this is the thing, the plants are there to really open the door to our
mhm,
healing. Let's pretend we're opening the door to a
mhm,
closet full of our own baggage and crap that we've accumulated over the years. The
mhm.
medicine helps you look at it quicker because you're sitting in an
Yeah,
objective space in your mind. You can't hide from all of these things that are in your mind anymore.
yeah.
And so you got to start pulling it out and unpacking it on your own.
Mhm,
The door is open, but what you choose to do with that is ultimately up to you. You
mhm.
choose to break the habits. You choose
Yes,
to
yes.
unpack your emotional trauma. That's a full decision that you have to make. And it's just not going to do it for you. Sometimes it does heal physical illnesses, but I still believe that's related to profound mental
Mhm.
shifts. But
Mindset
again, like,
shifts. Mhm,
yeah, these things can come
mhm,
back if we're not continuing
mhm,
to honor the processes that helped form them. That's what I've
mhm,
seen and experienced with people.
mhm,
And we really have to continue to do work on ourselves. And
mhm,
like I said, I love that about working with plant medicine as a facilitator. I have
mhm,
to honor my own rhythms. I have to honor my own needs because how am I going to hold space for other people being a hypocrite?
mhm,
I
mhm,
can do it, but that's not the person that I want to be. That's not how
mhm,
I want to show up for other people. So
mhm,
it's like an implied thing for me that now I have to continue to
mhm.
hold space for myself in a different way.
Mm.
And it's beautiful. I love it.
What are some of the most beautiful gifts that Aya or Wachuma or San Pedro has given to you?
I think that some of the most beautiful gifts that I've received from the medicine are mm, my own inner healing in terms of just working through generational traumas that have come up for me and working through things that I didn't have the awareness or courage to work through before. I've worked through so many things with my family. I've worked through so many things with friends. And I've just changed the way that I view self care. I think that's been a huge gift. And then also allowing me in my inner work to also be able to share those lessons with other people. Like, I had a lot of hard ones in this lifetime, whether that's experiencing rape or childhood abuse or different kinds of assault. It's been an intense one, like abusive relationships. I can check a lot of boxes in this lifetime. And the medicine showed me how all of these things that we view as wounds turn into gifts that we can share with other people. And when we heal these things within ourselves, it's something that we can continue to offer to the world as an offering. It's important for us to do that. In fact, people also need to hear our stories. People who are in different spaces and different parts of the healing journey that are resonant with what we have experienced need to hear that somebody got out of it, need to hear that somebody succeeded in clearing that for themselves, for their family, whatever it is. And that's been some of the biggest things the medicine has given me. And I'm eternally grateful.
Yeah, I was the first episode of this podcast was with our friend Yvonne Chokran. And I was mentioning to him that in my ceremony that the medicine had told me that all of my mindfulness practices, my meditation, and all of the deep work, pattern work that I was doing was really beautiful. And that the difference between working on things through the plant medicine and through the mindfulness practices is just that the plant medicine brings it up and out much quicker. But because it's coming out so rapidly, it's very hard to integrate it because for me, it was just like Pandora's box literally flew open and shadow shit was just like, it was coming out so quick of this is where you didn't serve yourself the best. This is where you've been allowing yourself to connect with people who are not of energetic matches. And energetically, this is what happens. And this is where you're allowing this mindset to dominate and this story and this belief. And it's all coming out so quickly that at one point I asked the medicine, I was like, ooh, can we slow this down? Because so much is coming out that I'm afraid that I'm not getting it all. And I said, it feels like chaos. And she said, honey, if it feels like chaos, it's because it's chaos happening inside of you. Cal- Slowing this down means calming this down. And she
Mhm.
said, no, your mindfulness practices are beautiful. Keep doing them. It's just these are coming up slower and you can integrate it because it's coming up at a pace where you can also digest it simultaneously. And that brings me to a point of like how imperative, how absolutely necessary it is to have a reputable coach or therapist who recognizes plant medicine and who can support the integration of what has come up for you and going in and working through the shadows and the generational trauma and all of the lineage work that is coming to the surface for you. Because when we don't put action behind doing the work and moving it forward, basically becomes a recreational drug. You're just going for a weekend, being shown all your shit, purging for 3 days, and then bada boom, bada bing. Until you integrate it and truly are like spending time working on it, you're not healing anything. You're not moving forward with what this medicine can really do for you.
I'm just, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of this one particular person that I saw in ceremony a couple of times who would call the ayahuasca weekends adult drug sleepovers. And he would refuse to share anything in sharing circle except how he found so much value in the shape of his puke bucket or something else completely obtuse, not about his emotions at all. And he would always say how grateful he was that he would lose weight that weekend. And it was just like one of those things. He's such a character, and I have so much
Yeah.
love for him. But that was what he was there,
Humor to be
yeah,
in his guarding. Yeah.
to deflect and
Yeah.
guard, and I still feel like he got value out of it, but at
Yeah.
the same point, also, I really know that he valued it for the weight loss. He was really
I can
fat.
attest to this. I literally shaved off 7 years of age from my face energetically. Like, I recognized when I was going into ceremony because I had gone through something so incredibly, like, traumatic for me and so painful that it aged me, like, 6, 7 years, and my face
Mhm.
was puffy, and it was just like I didn't even look like me anymore. And I went into ceremony, and I'm telling you, and I'm not saying this to promote, I am not suggesting anyone go to do ayahuasca for this reason alone. But I was glowing. My energy completely shifted. I had let go of a lot and I just had this radiance and I had lost a couple years off the face.
I agree. This is one thing to think about. All of the things that happen internally aside,
Mhm,
it is an incredibly potent anti-inflammatory. And for ayahuasca, it does clear out your stomach from one end or the other.
mhm,
And it is very good for your health. As is San Pedro. San Pedro tends to be a little bit less purgative than ayahuasca, but
mhm,
it has also a lot of anti-inflammatory compounds. And
mhm.
it is very good for your health. It is very good in general for mood regulation too.
So for the viewers, can you talk a little bit about Wachuma? Because it's not something I think that is being talked about very much. And
Yeah,
someone might have some questions.
absolutely. I would love to talk about that. I'm actually going to begin writing a book about that this year. I have already started because I've been doing teacher trainings down in Peru for how to brew Wachuma and how to hold space with Wachuma.
Mhm,
And it is such a beautiful plant. And so, what I really feel is special about that plant is it helps you to heal through the lens of an open heart. It helps you to really connect with yourself and other people in this safe, cared for, heart open space. And it's interesting because people always say that ayahuasca is the grandmother medicine and Wachuma is the grandfather medicine. And I love working with grandfather medicine because I find myself stepping into my feminine in that space because I feel masculine protection in that container. I feel safe. I feel like my heart is allowed to be open. I feel like I am okay to just melt, to just be, to just exist. And I feel that the plant really helps to connect not only to ourselves, but to people around us. So we can have beautiful, heart opening conversations that last hours. Time doesn't really exist in that space. It tends to feel like it just expands and contracts. And we feel the connection to ourselves and the world. We feel the connection to everything that we're eating. So many people, when they come into ceremony, my cooking is great, but it's not that great. Your cooking is better. But people come into ceremony and they are just like, oh my God, this is the best food I've ever had. This is the best grape. This is the best strawberry. You realize, I feel with Wachuma, how much we take for granted, whether you're just watching the ants crawl across the grass or watching the clouds float across the sky. There's a really beautiful element to just how we observe those things differently in that space that allows us to feel more at peace. For myself, what I really noticed that I got out of Wachuma in the beginning was this understanding that I had felt so disconnected from the people around me. I felt like I was alone in my healing process. I was the only person going through this thing. That was it. It was just me. I felt like that very strongly. I believed that. And so I'd allowed that to just make a wall and stop me from connecting with people, stop me from sharing my story. And Wachuma did that for me so gently and so beautifully. Ayahuasca broke down a lot of other barriers that I had and a lot of other resistances that I had around other things. But with Wachuma, it was entirely just about reconnecting to myself and others in a way that felt nourishing, deepening friendships, just allowing my heart to open and just to soak in the juiciness of that moment. There's a lot of times hard things that come up in Wachuma and in medicine space, and it can be very important to work through those with gentleness as well. But sometimes the harder things need to come out. And this is just such a powerful plant. It's actually one of the teacher plants that I think is more underappreciated and not as well known compared to peyote or ayahuasca. But it's my favorite to work with. And it comes from the Andes. It's a mountain cactus and it's been used in religious rituals for thousands of years to build community. And they would also feed it to Aztec warriors, even, or sorry, warriors, so they could go to battle because they were fearless that way. Like you don't feel temperature sometimes as much with Wachuma. Your body is very grounded, very centered, and even your body feels very protected. Like you feel very balanced. And so they would feed this to Incan warriors before they would go to battle to also help them with intuition and just with their different, their ability to connect to the battle around all of those things. And so now we're using it a little bit differently, but it still serves a similar purpose.
Are you seeing any peyote making its way over to that area?
I am seeing some peyote over here in Eugene. I actually had an invite to go to a ceremony here. I've had invites to go to ceremonies in Oregon, in California, in Peru, in Costa Rica, but somehow I haven't made any of them yet. But I feel that's going to change very shortly. My brother and I are actually going to Mexico soon and going to sit with a traditional shaman there and just have a beautiful experience. We haven't quite confirmed the dates, but it's been on my list of things to do for a while. The other grandfather.
So, out of curiosity, when you are navigating this space of interacting with shamans, what to you, what is a shaman? Because it's a very loose word and is and has been abused to some degree. And I'm very curious how you navigate that with discernment and with an open heart.
You have to take it on a case by case basis. It's just one of those things that the word shaman can be used for all kinds of things. It can be just whitewashy, hippie folks who think that they're doing some kind of healing work. It's that can be culturally appropriative. I feel that it's usually in this day and age safer to use the words facilitation. But also, if you're a healer and you are working with more spiritual modalities, I also feel like that falls a little bit short. So for me, if it's used in what I consider a proper context, I think that shamanic practitioners are people who are facilitators of psychedelic or healing experiences that work with spiritual energies. Because
Mhm.
otherwise, if you're not working with spiritual energies, like some of the shamans or some of the people who serve medicine I know are not, then you're a facilitator. Just be a facilitator.
Yeah.
Shamanism has its ties into
Yeah.
all kinds of different healing modalities, paganism, animal worship, ritual, and things like that. So that's what it feels tied into for me.
Mhm. Yeah, I know a lot of I know the basis for the word to some degree, and how it traditionally perceived is that the person goes into a trance, whether that's
Mhm,
through plant medicine or is able to invoke a trance state
mhm,
where they're able to speak to spirits or guides and then bring information to
mhm,
support the tribe or the community, what have you.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Recently, I did a podcast with one of our mutuals, Lama Dorje, and then also have had Paul Diamond and Yvonne Chokran and then Alexandra Cabri and a few others, which are all this really beautiful community of healers and of kind-hearted individuals that are really invested in truly being of service to others. And we all struggle with the human ego, but what I can say about these individuals is that they really are intentional about having theirs in check. They're really intentional about observing and catching when theirs is present. And I think it's a really beautiful group of people. And I know that you're working with quite a few of them through your marketing.
Yeah, I'm working with all of them in one way or another, or I have worked with all of them in the past. And right now, I'm mainly focusing on projects with Lama Dorje, which is such a pleasure and so beautiful. It's a very interesting and eye opening experience to put together marketing and social media strategy, as well as tackling operational things right now as well with Lama. And what a cool thing to do, just to have to think about dharma and the principles of dharma before I post or write anything. It's just I knew I wanted to do it because I wanted it to be a way that I deepen my dharma practice in action, in service, and it really has been that for me. It's just I have to learn about these things in order to support in that space and to show up and have his online presence be something that reflects who he is, which he's such a peaceful, joyful person. All of those people are, for the most part, and some to more or less degrees. It's just beautiful to see that and to actually see somebody who embodies Buddhist principles. People talk about these things. People are like, oh, I like Buddhist philosophy. That's cool. And that's important. I think that we all have a basis for something that we stand for, some inner core of our reasoning and logic that keeps us centered. But to actually see somebody who's joyful all the time, like the last time I saw Lama, I picked him up for an event in LA and his flight got delayed like 8 hours. And I was like, oh God, I was like, "Poor llama." He was, like, stuck in some random airport. I think it was, like, in Colombia or something. It was, like, his layover from Costa Rica, or maybe it was in Costa Rica, I don't remember. But he was stuck in the airport, and he was just like, "Oh, yeah, everything's good, total bien, and it's no problem. I just did walking meditation, and I just listened to some Dharma books." I was like, I would have been ready to kill somebody at that point, 8 hours in the airport. It was super funny. It was like me in LA traffic, like trying not to curse while I'm sitting there driving with Llama. I'm like, nope, won't do it. I won't do it. And he's just so peaceful, just meditating in the back seat as we're driving through this crazy traffic. It's a beautiful thing to see and to work with somebody like that. And all of those people, all of those four people I've known for years at this point, and they've all taught me so many beautiful lessons. And I'm super grateful for all of their approaches to the world. Paul Diamond is also one of my other main teachers in this lifetime, probably. That man has such a breadth of experience across a variety of different fields. And yeah, it's just learning to see the world through his lens has been fascinating and very eye opening. I feel like he has such a broad spectrum of knowledge. It just really makes me opened my eyes to what's possible in connecting Eastern and Western traditions in the medicine space. It's a powerfully, powerfully transformative space that he holds there. So, yeah, I've done a little bit of PR and social media for him. And I'm always happy to just champion people that I feel are bringing something of value to the world. And all of those people are definitely bringing something really beautiful to the table individually.
Beautiful. So what do the next steps look like for you, Jennifer Estevez? What's the future look like? You get a little glimpse of it?
Oh yeah, I've had some really beautiful insights over the last bit. And it was really interesting. I was observing myself even as we're doing this podcast and just seeing how my posture changed and how my excitement changed. When we were talking about the wine industry, I could just see myself like I'm just like sitting here. Oh, I think I'm already a little triggered just talking about it.
Yeah.
I feel that I'm so excited to be leaving that behind. It's something
Mhm.
that I realized again, working in a different way now.
Mhm.
I want to be more in my feminine energy. I want to be more in my nurturing energy to both myself and others in a way that feels like holistic, that feels wholeheartedly like balanced. Things always go out of balance. This is life, but I would like to really strive to just create more of that and live in more of that space. And I feel that just creating a lifestyle and working with people that allows that more will really do that. And I hope in the future that my work with Lama Dorje will continue to deepen in
Mhm.
terms of just being able to support him in the organization because
Mhm.
right now we're in the process of building a center there for him in Costa Rica. And it's such a
Mhm.
cool process to be a part of.
Yeah.
It's everything that I love. It's Buddhism, it's permaculture,
Mhm.
it's just such a beautiful space. It's
Mhm.
so many different things that are happening there are just incredibly beautiful. And it's wonderful to be a part of that story. And so I feel really called to continue to deepen that and deepen my community, my Sangha with relation to Buddhism.
Mhm.
And on a professional level, I'm so excited to be leaving the wine industry stuff behind. I'm so excited to be leaving more of the startup work behind.
Mhm.
There's some things that I'm going to work on here and there if they feel super aligned, if they feel super nourishing. But I'm okay to leave more of that behind too and just
Mhm.
step into working with people who are in the spiritual space in terms of like consultation and coaching
Mhm.
and people who are in the medicine space just leading journeys and Peru and things like
Mhm.
that and just doing healing work on people. It's something that feels really important to me. I feel very connected to San Pedro and tobacco, and I do a lot of deep work. And I want to be able to do other things in my life too that make it so that I don't really rely on that as like like my sole income source. So it never becomes that thing that like I need to make money off of it. I don't ever want to
Yeah.
feel that way about that. And so
Mhm.
finding that balance of working with my Buddhist teacher, supporting other teachers like Paul, and working in the medicine space.
Mhm.
That's really what's next for me. And then honestly, I've been thinking a lot about how if I want to make space for family and just actually building family, maybe having kids, this is not aligned with all the things that I'm doing in this moment. There needs to be more space for myself. And if
Mhm.
I'm planning to bring another being in this world, less is more needs to continue to be the way that I'm living my life in
Mhm.
terms of my work. And I spent a lot of time, I think, just valuing myself through my work and just letting more of that go as I continue to really find deeper value in myself and to work in these places where I feel fully appreciated and that I'm getting to use my areas of genius or I'm getting to work in my areas of genius more
Mhm.
fully is really that's what I'm going for.
I think that sounds like a beautiful future, and I love the idea of a little carbon copy coming in through you to express itself in Costa Rica or Peru. That would be fun.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. Got to get them the dual citizenship.
So I'm just wondering how you're feeling, if there's anything that's coming up for you that you'd like to touch on that or unpack that we've already introduced, or are you feeling complete?
Yeah, I feel I want to go back now that we've talked about what's next for me. Again, I want to talk about the things that people can do to continue to shift into what works for them. I just want to mention now that we've talked more about what I do in the medicine space and in the professional world and in the spiritual world. I had to figure out how I wanted all of those things to redistribute in my life when I thought about changing, working in the world of business. Because again, what was really present for me was I valued myself for what I did rather than who I was. And just getting that full idea of what is it that you are wanting to shift into? What are your priorities? That's super important. And not being afraid to step into that space where it's an unknown, not being afraid to take a chance to learn something new, knowing that you're never too old to do that. I have seen so many people change their entire life in an instant, like myself included. I've lived so many different lifetimes in this life. It's been crazy. And yeah, we just can't be afraid to do that and to reinvent ourselves over and over again. And this is also one of the reasons that I got into coaching is I noticed that people specifically would come to me after ceremonies and they would ask me questions about how do I transition into this new life that I'm envisioning? How do I find more fulfillment in my job? And the path is very personal for everybody. There's no one size fits all answer for that, other than I can say is follow your heart and don't give up. I have failed so many times on all of the paths that I've been on. I've failed so many times I can't even count. But it's all been a lesson and it's all been challenges that have come up for me in service of me stepping into my higher self and continuing to step into a space of higher vibration with myself, higher frequency for myself. And that's what's really important is that we all continue to do that.
Yes, I love what you just said and would like to add a little bit to that. Feeling called to express that the less that you solidify or attach to a title, meaning operating in the world, I am a sommelier, I am a coach, I am this, I am that. The less that we solidify that as our identity, and we continue focusing on what our true identity is. I am a really beautiful, vibrant, loving being who is here to have an incredible experience. And I am expressing as a coach. I'm expressing as a sommelier. I'm expressing as a marketing genius. Whatever it is that we're aligned with at that time, and whatever the art it is that we're expressing ourselves through is absolutely beautiful, but the less that we attach our identity to it, the more flexible and easy it is to transition and to play around with different styles, to play around with different careers, different business titles, different countries to live in. And really, that's where the healthiness of flexibility and not becoming rigid in how we perceive ourselves. And if you want the ability to be fluid and to get to move and try and experience and transition, and a life of a little less suffering, then really
Mhm.
pay attention to your attachments. Are you attaching and are you identifying? Or are you expressing as?
I love that. I love that. And I want to tie into that something that Paul actually shared with me in one of the magic classes that I was taking with him. And his classes are great. And they also include elements of Western psychology. They're not wishy washy, they're very intellectual and fascinating. And one of the times we were talking about better mental control through the understanding of I, right? The understanding of how we label everything, how everything is a label. Everything that we look at that has a name has a label, like the context that we, attach to certain things is a label. That's all ego, right? And understanding how we can work through that. He was saying in this lecture how ego and fully destroying the ego is not possible because you have to live in this lifetime and you have to understand like what everything is. You have to attach some sort of like name to it. But the attachment that allows you to be attached to those things to the degree that you're suffering is what you have to watch. And that was really profound for me because there's so many things that say that kill your ego, do this, destroy the ego. And it's just setting us up for failure. It's like trying to be perfect. It's an unrealistic and unattainable goal. But what we can do is unattach ourselves from the suffering that is associated with ego. And in doing that, we set ourselves free because one thing that we all share in common is suffering. And whether that's suffering because you're dealing with stress at work or suffering because you're in an argument with your partner, it's all suffering. Suffering because you lost somebody. There are different degrees of suffering, but in the end, they're still suffering. And how we perceive them based on the other things in our life, that is attachment. And so that's where we need to create that understanding so we can begin to let that go more. I had a conversation with Lama about my suffering, about ending my company a couple of days ago. And it was really beautiful to talk with him too from another perspective of just understanding, as the Buddhists say, this is all suffering and this is all attachment and everything is okay. People have done this before. They're going to do it again in different ways. And we just need to figure out different ways that we can make ourselves okay internally and okay within ourselves to minimize that suffering and just change how we approach it.
That reminds me, there's a gene key that I was just recently reading, and I can't remember if it's the shadow of half-heartedness, but it is essentially the concept of timing and that
Mhm,
everything has timing. And we hear people talk about this in terms of season, but it is recognizing that the timing that you may have with somebody, it might be 24 hours, but that was the timing that was meant to happen. And that was the natural time that relationship, it was meant for it to dissolve. That was
mhm,
natural timing. And some of us have
mhm,
natural timing of 25 years. And for some reason, we've created a narrative and a story in the old paradigm that we're shifting from, that failure is when timing doesn't stretch to a certain length of time, right? If
mhm,
our marriage, we get married and it only lasts 6 years, that it's a failure. But this was the natural progression of the relationship. And this was the natural time, unless, it was disrupted or exploded or imploded in some sort of way where it was destroyed, when two individuals or a company naturally comes to a close, such as death, a natural transition into a new state. There's a great
mhm,
deal of respect and honor to hold for that. And we've created this warped perception of it, which we create our own misery around that topic of attachment and not respecting the timing of this. And I think with your company, it hasn't been an abrupt thing. It's been something in the works that has been slowly dissolving over time because of the energy shift of the primary person that was the founder and the creator. And when we change energy dynamics, this company is a construct of all of the energy of those who are associated with it. And when you have one
mhm,
person pull away and start to shift because it's not a resonance, of course, it's going to start to alter, change, shift, or even dissolve. And I think it's a
mhm,
beautiful thing because there's so much more to transition into for everybody.
mhm. Yeah, I agree. I had actually an ayahuasca ceremony with Paul before I went to go to Nepal to take my Buddhist vows with Lama Dorje. And in this ceremony, I saw how I needed to change my relationship with money. And it was talking to me about how my relationship with money and like how I derived my value from money was a
Mm.
direct block to me pursuing a Buddhist path. And so it went through I went through this whole process in this ceremony of feeling this like crushing weight of this company that I didn't want to deal with anymore, like all the financial obligations based around that. And then it also showed me how, in order to pursue a Buddhist path, working with companies that sell alcohol and helping them to sell alcohol was completely not aligned. And I was like, oh, this kind of makes sense. I was
Yeah.
like, it is intoxicant, which is against the precepts. So I had to really consider that, think about that. And I talked to Paul the next morning about it. And I was just like, am I supposed to give this up? And he's, yeah, you're not killing anybody by running this company like directly. It's not like you're running a slaughterhouse, but it's not also helpful to your spiritual path in the long run. So you're going to
Yeah.
help, but take your time. You don't need to rush. And I was like, okay, ready to go
Mhm.
close the company tomorrow. But that
Yeah.
ceremony, I knew that it was going to happen at some point. And as we've been going through the last bit, I haven't
Mhm.
been fighting it. I've just been trying to figure out what's the
Mhm.
best way to do this. This is an old and outdated
Mhm.
artifice of my
Mhm.
past life. And
Mhm.
I'm okay to let it go because
Mhm.
it's just creating more continued attachment that I don't need to have. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's the process, but all
Mhm.
of these things, it's true. And it's true that it's not like this whole thing was a failure. I ran a company for 8 years. Yeah, it's great.
A very successful marketing company.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It was successful and it was great for a pretty long period of time, even through the pandemic. Like we figured things out, and I was looking at all the tools and like the systems and like the processes we built, and I'm like, cool, I'm taking all that with me. That's good. I learned
Yeah.
a lot of things by doing things wrong here, by doing things right, and
Mhm.
I had a lot that I'm taking away. And yeah, I was taking away also like a lot of gratitude from some of the conversations. I've had some hard conversations with my business partners, but also gratitude for how much we've built together and just
Mhm.
partnership in general. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to all be a negative thing. It's all a lesson.
No.
And yeah, things do all have endings and beginnings, whether
Yeah.
it's the end of this lifetime or the end
Mhm.
of this like time that we're together with a partner. It's really true. It's the natural process and
Mhm.
it is a part of everything. So
And it's a beautiful one. Jennifer, thank you. It was such a pleasure to have you. And I know that the viewers are going to learn a lot from the wisdom that you've shared and the path that you have walked and the suggestions that you have put out there to help others transition into areas that are far more in alignment for them. Really appreciate you showing up and expressing yourself and sharing your gifts.
yeah, thank you so much for holding space for that. I really appreciate being here. And I hope that what I said is helpful for people to just realize wherever they are in their journey that they can make that change. They can call in that change. They can direct that change that they're wanting to see. And it's never too late to do that, no matter where you are in your life path. Thank you
Absolutely.
again.
You are the architect of your realities.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Beautiful.
All
Thank you
right.
so much. It was such a pleasure.